Right, Stephen, thank you for joining us. I think it'd be really useful because we're looking towards the 4th of July now for opening up. Is there going to be a major change to your services, Metrolink buses through the TfGM network? Will the change to a sort of 1 metre plus distancing have any effect? Can you just give us a bit of a summary of what's happening at the moment, what you see the service levels like?
So yeah, well, morning. The transport services really have been starting to step up in terms of public transport really over June. So the 1st of June changes and the 15th of June. And certainly there are more services running now, bus, train and tram, than there were before. There are very few changes really to happen again this weekend. And our general messaging remains really in line with government guidance, really to use other means of transport travelling around if you really do need to travel at this stage. So that's about walking, cycling, or even driving, rather than relying on transport, which really for various reasons, and that's primarily around the capacity with social distancing, even with that change in mind, is still very challenging in terms of the amount of people that we can get on, say, a tram coach compared to normal. It's far lower than it would be in more normal times, and that's the same with a bus service, really. So although more services do operate, for instance, that the tram service is now running to a 10-minute service, it's already got to that level, and we don't think it's necessary at this stage to try and increase that any further. It runs till around 11 o'clock at night. So, it's limited in that sense, but in terms of the sort of evening, nighttime economy in the city centre, in terms of what it can do, I'm afraid. And therefore, I think the emphasis probably is more about taxis and the private hire trade in terms of very late night travel.
What's happening with the buses in terms of night buses and so on? Are they still running? Have they still been running?
So again, there's no real change to that at the present time, but those sorts of restrictions in terms of distancing and so on mean that we're anxious not to over promote it, I think, Vaughan at the present time, and to suggest that it can provide more of a service than a minimal level at this present time. I think that's probably the overall message.
Are there, given that the nighttime economy is going to open, and I guess safety and security is always one of the issues, have there been any thoughts about increasing security as we move into the weekend and then moving into a, quote, more normal environment?
I mean, certainly now both the Travel Safe unit, which is a collaboration joint working with Greater Manchester and British Transport Police, is working more normally. The Metrolink staffing, both in customer service and security staffing that you see at stop and on tram, is in place. So I think we're also thinking, obviously, not just about the weekend itself, although that's obviously a big issue, and it'll be really interesting to see what ultimately happens, as probably other people have said to you that you've interviewed as well. But we're also thinking into next week and beyond, and making sure that we've got, if you like, a sustainable approach to that, to make sure that we can continue to operate services and get messaging out about how people really ought to think about travelling, and that sort of things like making sure that you plan in advance. That's more important than ever. It's aspects like using contactless payment, or if you can't, exact fare. It's the aspects around face coverings. These are things that me and my colleagues have been saying now for some time, and they remain largely unchanged at the present time. They're the things to help each other more than anything else. Help us, obviously, and the transport operators to get people around safely. That's what's paramount.
Yeah, one of the messages that we've been saying, which obviously isn't going to happen universally, but we've been trying to get out to venues is pre-booking is the way that everybody would like to go, so that there's a consistent feeling that everybody knows how many people are going to be coming into the city, because the worst thing we're going to have is thousands of people potentially in the public realm not knowing how to get home and taking off sales, which are now available into public areas, and then trying to get on public transport on the way home.
And I think that what's really good is there's much improved. I think the best, certainly as I can remember, in the 5 or so years I've been in Manchester now, links between different providers, obviously the likes of CityCo, Growth Company, Chambers of Commerce, the links between the likes of ourselves from a transport perspective and the wider sort of GM economy, obviously security aspects that we already touched on. Those sorts of links and sharing of intelligence, I suppose, is the right way to describe it, are a lot better than they were. What we can't do, going back to sort of things like booking in advance, I think nobody would be expecting us to try and book your Metrolink trip in advance or something like that, even though, of course, for long distance train operators now, that's very much a way that they're encouraging it to happen. But we have to recognise that we're in a different situation, and therefore providing the right level of Metrolink or indeed other public transport services is quite hard. And we'll be reviewing that during and soon after the weekend to see what that's like. But as I said earlier, a lot of services now are coming back. We're reinstating the evening free bus service from this weekend. We're bringing back, less directly relevant, I suppose, to large parts of the city centre, but we're bringing back all remaining subsidised bus services. They're all returning as well. But the comments I've already made about social distancing mean, they've got limited capacity, but we are bringing services back as far as we think is possible or appropriate at this point in time.
Are we finding, more generally, are we finding across the services that there's less of an issue with isolating drivers, isolating mechanics and so on? Because that was a real issue 3 months ago, wasn't it? That even if you wanted to deliver more services, you simply couldn't, because you didn't have the drivers and you didn't have the particularly mechanics on buses were a real issue, I think.
I think overall our feeling would be that that's more in common with the general levels really in society. So it's clearly an issue that operators are having to contend with. And will be an issue, or is likely to be an issue, in terms of returning to a full service level. But we are still reduced in that sense. And I hope, obviously, that's the situation in terms of its current level that can be maintained at the present time.
So in terms of face coverings and so on, we're still saying that you need to have a face covering to use public transport?
I think really it's stronger than need to. You have to. Remembering it's the law. It's quite interesting that in the lead up to it becoming mandatory, and it was sort of announced with about, a week or 10 days notice, we were really concerned because on the tram system it was something like 15%, 20% on some lines, very low on bus, and we were really concerned about the extent to which people would heed the messaging and would do that, even though it's mandatory. On the tram system, typically, and we do monitor this by line each day, that's around, the compliance is around 90, 93, 95%. It's a bit lower on bus, and again varies sometimes by time of day, area, route. But I think the thing there that I always try to get across, and I think largely now that has landed, but we're not talking about face masks per se. This can be a fairly basic face covering that is what's so important in terms of covering your mouth or your nose. So it doesn't come naturally to people, and obviously more generally in society, you only need to go in something like a supermarket, a shop more generally, or walk down a street. And it's by far from the norm that people do that. So we're quite conscious that from a transport perspective, it's one of those things that you need to do that you wouldn't otherwise do. So people can feel a bit uncomfortable about it, but it is so important. And I can only say, well, that's the law now, and that's what people need to do. But happily, the levels of compliance are at a good level. Let's say that. But we need to keep all these things going, don't we? That's the thing, really. And things like the messages around contactless payment, around keep considering active travel. I mean, the level of cycling, including around the city centre, is still encouragingly up, and we're doing what we can do with the councils in terms of pop-up cycle lanes, getting out walking for those shorter journeys instead, are still key messages for us at the present time, as they've been for quite a while now, really.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Okay, thank you.